Okay, I have something to admit. I have fallen in love, deeply and head over heels in love with this. This is the Sigma 17 to 40mm f1.8 DC art lens. I've been shooting with this lens on the Sony a6700 for a few weeks now, and it is just flat out excellent. Image quality, sharp and beautiful. Bokeh, also beautiful. Autofocus, honestly, it feels completely indistinguishable from Sony's own lenses. Okay, so let's go all the way back to 2019. That's when I was at the press event where the Sony a6600 was introduced. And that camera was a lot better performer than the previous Sony cameras in the APS-C space. But I said at the time there were not a lot of great lenses for the system. Now here we are in 2025. The a6700 exists. Its autofocus is even better than the 6600, but there are still not a lot of great lenses for the system. This Sigma 17 to 40mm takes care of at least one of the needs you might have for a fantastic piece of glass. And thanks to the APS-C crop, this lens ends up being very much like a 24 to 70 f2.8, which is a lens that pretty much all photographers either have or should have in their camera bags. The Sigma 17 to 40 blows Sony's APS-C lenses away, seriously. Of course, you Fuji shooters out there might see this differently, right? You guys have a ton of really great APS-C lenses because that's the format that the Fuji cameras are in, right? And we both know Fuji has excellent image quality in its lenses, but it also doesn't have a lens that matches the Sigma 17 to 40. Let's talk about why this might be a perfect lens for you, starting with the build quality and the optical performance. First of all, this lens feels rock solid. It's metal, it's got weather-resistant sealing, and it's an internal zoom, which means that the barrel doesn't extend when you zoom. One of the reasons I hate external zooms is because if you're turning it and the lens barrel comes out, now it's got a sort of different center of gravity, which is especially bad if you're working with a gimbal. And yeah, you could say it's a little bit big when you're shooting on APS-C, but part of that length is due to the hood. It's not huge, but it does give you that Funko Pop vibe, you know, those toys with like the really small bodies and the big cartoonish heads. You get used to it when you're shooting, but if you bought APS-C specifically for the small size of the system, this might not be the lens for you. So as a rule of thumb, the more elements and groups that a lens has, the better the image quality is. Optically, this lens is stacked. It has 17 elements in 11 groups with 4 super low dispersion elements and 4 aspherical elements. It also has 11 aperture blades, which explains the smooth and gorgeous bokeh that this thing makes. The minimum focus distance is about 11 inches with a magnification of 1 to about 5. It's not a macro lens exactly, but it does get you surprisingly close. That's actually one of my favorite things about this lens because all the flowers are blooming in my yard and I've been going out and photographing them with the bees collecting pollen, and I think it's really nice to be able to take just this little lens and not have to have a macro lens with me just to get images like this. Controls on this lens are minimal, but it does have everything that you need. One of my favorite things is that it has a dedicated aperture ring if you're shooting on Sony, Fuji, and L-mount versions. For Canon RF, it swaps that aperture ring for their control ring, which is a really cool system, but I don't like it quite as much as the dedicated aperture ring. There's also several customizable autofocus lock buttons on the barrel and a physical autofocus to manual focus switch. For video shooters and for people like me who prefer this preference, it has a click and a declick setting, so when the lens is set to the click setting, it sounds like that to change the aperture, and when it's set to the declick shooting, it sounds like that. Like most standard zooms, there's no built-in image stabilization, but with the IBIS on Sony and Fuji cameras, that is not a problem. It's probably not a problem on L-mount or the Canon systems. I just haven't shot them as much to know how this lens would perform on them. So let's talk about autofocus. This lens is an autofocus monster. Sometimes big wide aperture lenses can struggle on autofocus, but not this one at all. Sigma use what they call their high response linear actuator motor, or HRVA, which is fast, accurate, and nearly silent. To test the lens, I adopted 2 kittens. Okay, I adopted them because they're adorable, but they're also great for testing autofocus. Tiny faces, fast movements, the lens kept up like a champ. Shooting with the 6700, the eye detect for animals kept up with jumping, moving, and playing kittens. It was really great. And if kittens weren't enough, I also tested on bees as they were darting around the flowers, gathering pollen. The Sony a6700 has insect detection. I don't usually use it, but that 11-inch minimum focus distance and the subject detection on the a6700 meant it behaved really well. Get it? Behaved? Right. Now, as great as this lens is, we have to talk about the APS-C trade-offs. APS-C sensors, especially when they're the same resolution as a full-frame camera, have smaller pixels. If you take 20 million pixels and you put it on a surface this big, and you take 20 million pixels and you put it on a surface this big, the pixels have to get smaller in order to fit as many on the smaller size, and that means less dynamic range and a lot more noise in low light on APS-C. It is not the lens's fault, but it is something to know. In these shots at sunset, the image quality issues here aren't the lens, it is the camera. In high contrast scenes like this, The detail on the highlights and the shadows is just not what you're going to get from a full-frame camera. That said, in good light, this lens is brilliant. Colors are gorgeous, details are crisp, and the background defocus is lush and lovely, which was my college band's name. Probably most people aren't buying this as a video lens, but video performance is solid. On the Sony a6700 that I tested this with, autofocus tracks beautifully. Focus breathing is minimal to non-existent, and the internal zoom makes it gimbal friendly. The only thing I didn't love was that same long zoom throw length. When you're shooting handheld, it's already tough enough to keep the camera smooth without shaking it, that when you move it like this, you don't want it to introduce more shake that you then have to correct later. Tripod shooters, you're fine, but if you're doing run and gun, just know it takes a little finesse. Now, as great as this lens is, we have to talk about the APS-C trade-offs. APS-C sensors, especially when they're the same resolution as a full-frame camera, have smaller pixels. If you take 20 million pixels and you put it on a surface this big, and you take 20 million pixels and you put it on a surface this big, the pixels have to get smaller in order to fit as many on the smaller size, and that means less dynamic range and a lot more noise in low light on APS-C. It is not the lens's fault, but it is something to know. In these shots at sunset, the image quality issues here aren't the lens, it is the camera. In high contrast scenes like this, the detail on the highlights and the shadows is just not what you're going to get from a full-frame camera. This lens is for APS-C shooters who want a lens that performs like the best full-frame glass available. As of shooting this video, it is $920, which is not cheap, but it does deliver top-tier performance in a space where your options are pretty limited. So if you're building your kit around APS-C, this could easily be your go-to lens for portraits, travel, landscapes, street photography, even weddings. It's that good. So should you buy it? Well, if you want the best APS-C zoom available right now with a fast aperture, sharp optics, and pro-level build quality, the Sigma 17-40mm f1.8 DC DN Art is absolutely amazing, and it delivers. If you look at the specs on the lens and you look at the price and you say, that is a very expensive lens, I'm not sure that I need it, then you probably don't need it. Also, if you're an APS-C shooter and you already have a zoom that you like and the background defocus is fine for you and the focus speed is fine for you, there isn't really a reason to upgrade to this lens. But I'm really curious to hear about why you're watching this video. Are you watching this because you're thinking about buying this lens? Are you watching it because you're hoping to get a reason to not buy this lens? What is it about this lens that was intriguing enough for you to watch this video? Let me know in the comments below, and if you have any questions about the lens or other Sigma and Sony lenses, leave those in the comments below. I love to answer questions about photo gear. I'm David Schloss, the editor of Imaging Resource, and until next time, go out and give it your best shot.